one of the new features that we just rolled out this month, December 2023, is the introduction of the Tutela severity score. Um, and we're going to quickly describe how we come up with this score, why it's different from your normal CVSS scores, and how it's going to help you to more effectively manage your security risk. Um, so yes, now in the dashboard you're going to start seeing two scores. One is what you're already used to, which is the severity, and this we get directly from the CVE. However, you're going to start seeing another score, which is the severity score, the Tutela severity score. And you can already get a good idea of how we calculate it, because if you hover over it, you're going to see a tool tip pop up, and you've got something called an EPSS, which in this case you can see has a very low number, 0.002 out of 1, and a CVE score, which is 8.1 out of 10 in this case. But then the aggregate score is quite low, 0.2. So what's the difference? What are all these numbers? And essentially, I am going to post an article online. You'll find the link, but this is a rough draft with all the important notes. And over here, we're leveraging two numbers, the CVSS score and something called the EPSS score. CVSS is your traditional scoring system, okay? The problem with it, which gets assigned by NIST, the problem with it is its sheer volume. So you can see over time, the CV, at least since 2017, it's kind of really exploded. Now we've seen a bit of a dip, um, but there is a high number of high severity CVEs, so you can have anywhere over 4,000. So there's a real big number of them. Same for medium, same for low. And what we're trying to address with this Tutela score is um, how to deal with that flood, right? Of like, listen, how am I going to really make sure that I am patching and focusing my attention on those CVEs that really matter to me, okay? Now, obviously, we're not the first ones to have this issue, and the same organization that came up with CVSS scores, um, which is first.org, actually came up with this machine learning model that tries to understand how likely a particular CVE is going to be exploited over the next 30 days. In fact, EPSS stands for Exploit Prediction Scoring System. And it's a very interesting read, but the way that this algorithm decides if a vulnerability really is going to be exploited or not is by using all these features that you're seeing over here. And what is of particular interest to us is, apart from the CVSS metrics, it also takes into account if a CVE is being discussed or listed on a security related website, such as the CISA KEV, Google Project Zero, and a lot more. Also, if there's publicly available exploit code, and if it's included in offensive security tools. Now, over here, for these old-time users, we already had bits and pieces of this in place, but now we're trying to unify them into a single score. So we got this into our fold, into our own algorithms. There's a very good um, description of how the model kind of predicts predicts the future. Over here, you can start seeing how the EPSS, together with a normal CVE score, is going to help you focus really on those CVEs that matter to you. Why? Because they are probably going to be exploited. So if you look at how the score of a CVE evolves over time, they have a very good article on a case study for log4shell. In log4shell, you can see that its EPSS score started uh, pretty low, but then kind of shot up as more vendors referenced the CVE, more offensive tools like Metasploit started including the uh, exploit code. Then it went down again because a Metasploit module was removed, and then it went up again because it was added again. So there's this flux over time. Take home message is the EPSS helps you to decide if a vulnerability is worth patching now or not, because it's probably going to be exploited because there is a lot of code out there. Now, the CVSS score and the EPSS score are not mutually exclusive, which brings us to our last link before I show it to you in the dashboard. If you look at this header using EPSS and CVSS together, over here you can see that they have some pretty good visualizations on how the two scores together can help you triage more effectively. So you should definitely prioritize the ones that are with a high EPSS score and a high CVSS score. Um, and then you have kind of in between where you either have low severity but very probably going to be exploited, or not going to be not probably not going to be exploited, but it could do a lot of damage, and just deprioritize the rest. The way I like thinking about it, and this is what we kept in mind when we were developing Tutela score, is kind of like the magic, the Gartner magic quadrant. So on the one hand, you have the EPSS score, which is going from low to high, and this is indicative of a hacker's ability to execute an exploit on a particular vulnerability. And on the bottom axis here, we have the CVS score, so your normal vulnerability score going from low to high, and this represents the damage, okay, that can be done. So if a vulnerability is exploited, what am I looking at? What kind of damage is going to happen? Now, the way we sorted out our magic quadrant is what you're seeing over here. So obviously, if the vulnerability is low impact and low probability of being exploited, it's going to be classified as low. When it comes to middle, we put more of an emphasis on someone exploiting the vulnerability, because at least in my personal opinion, if it's a domino effect. It's pretty once you exploit and you gain a foothold into a customer's into a victim's infrastructure, you kind of have the hardest bit done. Unfortunately, we still have hard exterior GUI interior in most deployments. So even though the CVSS score might be relatively low, say a medium severity on its own, if we see a very high EPSS score, we're going to mark it as high. But conversely, if there is a high CVE score but not much chance of it being exploited, we reduce it down to medium. And critical being high across the board. So kind of over here, we're giving a higher slant to those CVEs that are most probably going to be exploited over the next 30 days, so that you can focus on those. And this is where the Tutela severity score comes from. And as I already showed you in the dashboard, you're going to start seeing it over here. Now, again, old-time users are probably very familiar with this, so you can see that most of them are low and medium, and we have very few which go into critical or high, as opposed to your normal CVE where we actually have quite a bit that go high or critical. And we filter by Tutela severity now. And let's go on critical so that you see actually what critical is. And critical is going to show you something like this. So this is a new CVE here. The Outlook escalate. It's very recent. An Outlook escalation privilege vulnerability, and if you hover over it, it has a very high CVE score, 9.8 out of 10. The very high probability of being exploited, 0.8. So about 80%. Plus our older metrics are still there. Where like, listen, we list down that actually it's listed in the CISA KEV, which is reflected in the EPSS score as we just saw. So we give it a very high score, and the aggregated score is critical. So it kind of helps you narrow your focus to exactly what you need to do now. In addition to this, we're also releasing a beta dashboard, which is this, our all entities. And all they're kind of related, our Tutela severity score and this dashboard, because in this screen we are trying to assign a risk score to all the entities, whether they are host-based, network-based, and soon we're going to start seeing Docker images, libraries, things like that, in your network. And this works by taking into account two components. You have compliance components and vulnerabilities. So the vulnerabilities is exactly what we just saw now. Unresolved vulnerabilities that have a low, medium, high, critical score. But then we also take into account compliance. So if there is a high number of failing compliance checks, we assign a higher risk. So if you have hosts which have critical vulnerabilities and quite a number of missing compliance checks, you're going to be assigned a high rating. But then conversely, if we go to okay, great, nodes where we don't have any vulnerabilities which are present because they've all been resolved, and there's just failing compliance checks, then we'll assign it a medium. And again, it's a very similar thinking as before. If a vulnerability, your vulnerabilities reflect the probability, the risk that an attacker will actually come in to your infrastructure, and the compliance part is best practices. So once they're in, how easy are they going to find it to move laterally or vertically within the same host, escalation of privileges and that kind of thing. So we assign different risk scores across your infrastructure. And that is it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out.